Have you ever been so certain of what the world thinks of you, until one ordinary moment quietly shatters everything? Have you ever carried a label so long, one given by others, whispered behind your back, that you started to believe it yourself? What if I told you that this story begins with one of the oldest insults ever thrown at Filipinos who dare to dream big on the world stage? They're too short for the NBA. It is said almost casually, as if the world has already agreed on it centuries ago. Commentators repeat it. Scouts smirk at it. Even some Filipinos joke about it to numb how it stings. It's the sort of idea that, when you hear it enough times, starts to echo in your chest long after the noise stops. But here's the shock. One of the NBA's most respected veteran scouts, someone whose decisions have shaped multiple championship rosters, once repeated that same belief, word for word. He wasn't angry when he said it, not even mocking. He said it the way someone comments about gravity, convinced it was simple truth. Yet months later, he would be the same man sitting in stunned silence, gripping the railings of a half-filled high school gym in Manila, realizing he may have misjudged not just a player, but an entire nation. That discovery began with a boy named Mateo Teo Angeles. Teo was 17 then, barely 5'6", a wiry kid from Cavite who dribbled like he was trying to outrun every insult life ever threw at him. His story wasn't the story of a prodigy raised in privilege. It was the story of someone who learned the game on uneven concrete. With a rim bent by storms, and a ball patched so many times it stopped bouncing straight. He didn't look like someone crafted for global arenas. He looked like someone who ran errands at the local sari-sari store after practice. Yet something about him pulled you in. Not his size, not his speed, but the fire in his eyes every time he picked up the ball. Before we move deeper, imagine him standing outside a barangay court at dusk, the sky dimming, the sound of tricycles rolling by while he practiced crossovers until his palms burned. Imagine him whispering the same dream every Filipino kid whispers at least once. One day, NBA. Not because he believed it was possible, but because dreaming was sometimes the only thing that felt free. The scout who would later discover him had never even heard his name then. And Teo had never heard of that scout either. All he knew was that life had taught him early that the world doesn't offer miracles. It only opens small cracks, and only to those willing to bleed through them. And in the quiet of that cracked concrete court, something was already stirring, something that would soon challenge the world's old assumptions, something that would turn mockery into awe, something that would make even seasoned NBA professionals question whether they had understood the Philippines at all. But the journey toward that moment, and the pain required to reach it, was only beginning. Teo's childhood was marked not by glory, but by the kind of struggle that shapes a person's bones. His father had left early, drifting to the Middle East for work, and then disappearing from contact altogether. His mother worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, and there were nights when their home echoed more with silence than conversation. Hunger wasn't a tragedy. It was a routine. His mother would pretend she had already eaten just so Teo could finish the leftovers. On the days when rains flooded their street, Teo tied his shoes around his neck and waded through knee-deep water to get to school. Those same shoes would later be used for practice. Still wet, still muddy, still heavy. Illness came often, treated late because money always ran out before medicine, and every time he was sidelined by fever or exhaustion, he'd watch from his window as other kids played ball, wondering if God was telling him to let go. He tried leaving basketball once, not by choice, but because survival demanded it. He worked odd jobs at construction sites during summers, carrying sandbags heavier than his own frame. The men there admired his grit, but laughed kindly whenever he mentioned the NBA. "Anak, the world won't pick someone like us," one worker said. That's for people who grow tall and eat 3 times a day." The words weren't cruel. They were spoken with the comfort of resignation, the way a weary man speaks of dreams he once had but buried. Teo tried to look for opportunities outside the Philippines. He watched online videos about academies in the US, training programs in Japan, scholarships in Europe. He sent emails, messages, even recorded videos on a borrowed phone. Most went unanswered. One academy replied, "Your height is a limiting factor. We regret to inform you." Hopelessness was no longer a stranger. It had become a frequent guest. And then something unexpected happened. A small moment, almost trivial to an outsider, yet powerful enough to alter Teo's course. During a local game, he injured his ankle badly. His mother rushed him to a small clinic, already preparing herself for bills she could not pay. But the doctor, a Filipino in his mid-40s with tired eyes but a warm voice, treated Teo without asking for anything up front. "You're a player?" he asked softly as he tightened the bandage. "Don't stop. The Philippines need stories that remind us who we are." That sentence lodged itself inside Teo's chest. A week later, still limping, he found himself invited to a small basketball camp run by a Jesuit university in Manila. It wasn't famous, it wasn't global, but the atmosphere was different. Quieter, kinder, almost sacred in its intention. The coaches didn't look at height first. They looked at heart. And Teo felt, for the first time, something close to hope, fragile but real, stirring like a candle trying to glow in the wind. Could the Philippines, this country often mocked for its size, its limitations, its humble courts, truly become the place where dreams once dismissed might rise again? Teo didn't know. All he knew was that something was pulling him forward. When Teo entered Manila for the camp, he expected indifference. Instead, he found warmth, quiet, steady, and unmistakably Filipino. The campus wasn't grand, but it felt alive. Students greeted strangers. Maintenance staff smiled at him like they had known him for years. A small chapel stood near the court, and every morning players gathered there to pray. Not for trophies, not for fame, but for strength, humility, and protection. It was there that the shift began. The first time Teo touched the ball in the university gym, something felt different. The coach, a thoughtful man with silver hair, watched him carefully, not with skepticism, but with curiosity. After a few minutes of drills, he approached Teo and said, "You play like someone who has carried too much weight for too long." It wasn't criticism. It was recognition. During scrimmages, Teo surprised even himself. His speed sharpened, his decisions felt quicker, his passes threaded through narrow lanes like whispers traveling through crowded streets. And the players around him, some tall, some skilled, some far more experienced, never dismissed him. They embraced him, encouraged him, treated him as equal. One moment stood out. A 6'4" center accidentally knocked Teo to the floor while going for a rebound. Instead of mocking him, the player immediately reached out and pulled him up firmly. "You're tough, bro," he said with a grin. "Height won't stop you." That sentence, simple, genuine, struck Teo deeper than the fall. Outside the court, the kindness continued. A cafeteria worker noticed him eating alone and handed him an extra boiled egg, saying, "You look like you need this more than I do." Students invited him to study sessions. When his shoes tore again, a teammate quietly left a pair outside his dorm door. These weren't dramatic gestures. They were everyday acts of Filipino compassion, the kind that heals without announcing itself. But the moment that truly changed Teo came one rainy night. Practice had ended. Most players had gone home. Teo stayed behind, shooting in the dim light. As he went for a layup, he heard footsteps near the court entrance. The silver-haired coach stood there, watching him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you know," the coach said gently, "that scouts around the world think Filipinos can't make it big because of height?" Teo nodded. The coach continued, "They're wrong. They look at inches. I look at spirit. And you have something rare, Teo. Something they won't understand until it's right in front of them." For the first time in his life, Teo felt something inside him anchor. Belief, not borrowed from others, but born from within. He didn't know that thousands of miles away, an NBA scout was already booking a flight to Manila, curious about a rumor he had heard. A Filipino kid, too short to matter, yet too good to ignore. The day the NBA scout arrived, the Manila heat shimmered off the pavement like a veil. The scout, James Rourke, a grizzled veteran with decades of experience, had come expecting to confirm a rumor and dismiss it quickly. He had built his career evaluating giants, 7-footers, athletes with wingspans wider than doorways. A 5'6" player was, to him, a statistical impossibility. He entered the gym carrying quiet skepticism. But the moment Teo touched the ball, that skepticism began to crack. Rourke watched as Teo drove into the lane, weaving between defenders with impossible grace. He watched him deliver passes so precise they looked choreographed. He watched him fall, get up, fall again, and still return with fiercer determination. But what stunned him wasn't talent. It was heart. Every possession, every decision, every ounce of effort, Teo gave all of it. Not with the arrogance of a prodigy, but with the humility of someone who had known suffering and chosen hope anyway. The gym echoed not with applause, but with something quieter and deeper. A collective awareness that they were witnessing a spirit that refused to break. At one point, Rourke stood up from the bleachers, suddenly alert. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying Teo the way a man studies something that challenges his entire belief system. During a timeout, he approached the coach. "Where did you find this kid?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. The coach smiled. "We didn't find him. He found us." Rourke watched again, and for the first time in decades, he felt something stir in him. Something like admiration. Something like humility. Then came the moment that would forever stay with him. Teo went for a drive, collided with a defender, and crashed onto the floor. The whole gym froze. But Teo didn't stay down. He pressed his palms to the court, pushed himself up, and jogged back on defense. Not to impress, not to prove a point, but because giving up simply wasn't part of him. Rourke whispered to himself, "I've never seen this anywhere else." The players resumed. The game flowed. But Rourke remained changed, his worldview rearranging itself with each passing second. That night, when he left the gym, he didn't go straight to his hotel. He walked around the campus, absorbing the warmth of the place, students laughing, security guards greeting passers-by kindly, a small chapel glowing in the distance. It felt like a world built not on height or power, but on faith, compassion, and resilience. And Rourke realized something profound. He hadn't just misjudged a player. He had misjudged a country. News spread quickly. An NBA scout had shown interest in a Filipino player. But for Teo, the story wasn't about scouting reports or potential opportunities. It was about transformation, an internal shift that had reshaped the way he saw himself, his country, and his journey. When Rourke finally spoke to him, it wasn't with authority, but with sincerity. He told Teo, "You made me question what I thought I knew, not just about basketball, but about spirit." Teo didn't know how to respond. He simply bowed his head slightly, Filipino in his humility. There were no promises, no guarantees. But that didn't matter. The recognition itself was a victory, not just for Teo, but for every young Filipino who had ever been told they were too small, too modest, too limited for the world. In the following months, Teo continued training. But his heart had changed. Basketball no longer felt like a desperate escape from poverty. It felt like a calling, a responsibility, a way to honor the country that had carried him through hunger, illness, grief, and doubt. One evening, as he walked past the campus chapel, he stopped inside. The candles flickered softly. He knelt, not to ask for glory, but to give thanks for everything the Philippines had given him: compassion in clinics, kindness in cafeterias, mentorship on courts, and the belief that even the smallest flame can light a dark room. Rourke returned to the U.S., and when asked about his trip, he said something unusual in interviews. "There's something in the Philippines," he said slowly, "a resilience I can't explain, a fire I haven't seen anywhere else." People laughed at first, brushing it off as sentimental. But Rourke insisted, "If you want to understand heart, go to Manila." Meanwhile, Teo played not for fame, but for meaning. And every time he stepped onto the court, he carried not just his own dream, but the dream of a nation that had been underestimated for far too long. Years later, when Teo finally stood in front of a crowd, older, wiser, still not tall, he shared something that silenced the entire room. "The world measured me by inches," he said softly, "but the Philippines measured me by heart." He wasn't a superstar. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't the next global icon. But he represented something far more powerful. Proof that greatness is not defined by height, but by spirit. And his journey echoed something universal. Because in a world growing colder, harsher, more skeptical, the Philippines still holds on to values that many places have forgotten. Faith that steadies you, compassion that heals you, resilience that lifts you, and hope that refuses to die. Teo's story became a reminder, not just for Filipinos, but for anyone listening, that miracles don't always arrive in bright packaging. Sometimes they appear in quiet gyms, in borrowed shoes, in smiles from strangers, in hands that lift you up when you fall. And as Teo looked out at his audience, he ended with words that resonated far beyond that room. "The world mocked us for being small," he said, "but they forgot something. God writes the biggest stories through the smallest players." That night, the crowd rose to their feet, not because of Teo alone, but because in his story, they saw themselves. A nation that may be underestimated, a people that may be overlooked, but a spirit that refuses to be ignored. And in that moment, everyone understood. The Philippines isn't just an underdog. It is a rising force, quiet, humble, but unstoppable. A country that turns struggle into strength, kindness into power, and faith into victory. Teo was just one story. But he would not be the last.